generative AI threatened the business model of some of the biggest companies in the world and Google's search engine. And that got threatened. And Microsoft, in particular, smelled blood in the water and suddenly sees generative AI as a way to crack that fortress that Google has built. How does one actually go about measuring the digital economy? The digital economy is that it has grown 2.5 times faster than the traditional economy over the last 10 years. It's expected to contribute 30% of global GDP and create 30 million jobs by 2030. With the overall adoption of digital technologies, the infrastructure, the policies and regulations, China and India still have not reached that level of Northern Europe or North America. So they are still in the breakout zone. Tremendous strides that India has made in terms of access to the digital infrastructure, access to high-speed internet, and then the digital public infrastructure has been a very powerful boost to the Indian digital economy and digital competitiveness. 2023 as being the year when everybody was jumping up and down about AI. Well, who made money from it? And it's not clear even in 2024. Ultimately, the chickens are going to come home to roost. Somebody has to pay for all this investment. We are looking at the growth of AI, pretty much at the early stages of an emerging wave, this general purpose technology. And the reason why I say that and is kind of talking about where is money going to be made in electricity. Is it at electricity generation or is it actually the applications of electricity?
Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Great Tech Game podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Professor Bhaskar Chakravorti, who's Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, and also the founder and director, chair of the Digital Planet Initiative, which looks at the impact technology has on lives and livelihoods around the world. I've had many conversations previously with Professor Chakravorti that have been very helpful and are featured prominently in my own book, The Great Tech Game. So I'm delighted to have you here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Anirudh, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the help and great inputs that you had provided in the course of writing the book. The Digital Intelligence Index, which is one thing we'll get into in our conversation today, I thought was a great framework to help understand how nations should be thinking about their digital economies, and the work that you and your team have done on that has been very helpful to me, and I think many conversations that I've had since basis the book as well. So thank you for that. Today, what I want to do is cover a bunch of that work, but also some of the more later work that you've now done more recently around AI and national competitiveness. So what we'll do is we'll get started right away with a broader question that I wanted to ask you first, which is, as nations think about this transition from the industrial economy to a digital economy, to a more tech-driven economy, one of the arguments I've made in my book is that tech is really the new engine of economic growth for nations, is really the new wealth of nations. To quote Adam Smith, in some ways, if Industrial Revolution saw a different engine of economic growth, today we see digital technologies and technology more broadly also as the real engine of economic growth. So what I want to ask you is to talk to us a little bit about the relationship you see between technology, productivity, and economic growth. How should economists, how should policymakers, how should students and people really interested in the questions of economic growth today be thinking about that relationship between technology and economic growth?
Yeah, well, great question, Anirudh, and of course, a very broad question, right? And we all kind of understand the role that technology has been playing in the economy and society at large, and the many aspects of our day-to-day life and social interactions and political interactions and so on that are not necessarily captured by economic growth. So I just want to kind of offer that caveat right at the start, because the usual measures, GDP and others, they capture certain things, and a few other things are kind of left out. And a big part of what technology facilitates, could be part of what is captured and part of also what is not captured. So that is what makes things kind of interesting and potentially even controversial. But I think there's no getting around the fact that over the last 25, 30 years, maybe even more, but we have sort of felt it, significantly in this century, and actually. I'd say, starting from the early 90s of the previous century, the onward move of technology and the kind of the greater penetration of the technology-led sector in the overall economy. And when I talk about technology, of course, there are many different kinds of technologies that we could talk about. There's, everything to do with telecom and digital technologies, but there are a whole bunch of other kinds of technologies we could be talking about. We could be talking about synthetic biology, we could be talking about nanomaterials, we could be talking about renewable energy, and so on and so forth. But for the moment, let's just stick with digital technologies. And if you think about the role of digital technologies in the economy, I mean, since the early 90s, and even before that, technology has been gradually becoming a larger and larger part of the economy. And one of the most significant aspects of the digital economy is that it has grown 2.5 times faster than the traditional economy over the last 10 years. And it's expected to contribute 30% of global GDP and create 30 million jobs by 2030. So, that's just a kind of a broad perspective on the role of digital technologies in the overall economy. Digital transformations can unlock over $1 trillion in additional market cap across all the Fortune 500 companies. So if you just think about the impact it has, not just on the economy, but on companies across the board, it's pretty significant. The tech sector is the driver of stock markets and has been the driver of stock markets, in recent past. And of course, speaking of the recent past, we've kind of all, no matter where we live in the world, have gone through the experience of a pandemic where, people, whether they wanted it or not, were locked in to their homes. And if you could continue either your work or social interactions using digital means, people did so. And the digital economy became almost all of the economy, wherever the economy involved some kind of information transfer. So we experienced, a world where, we were primarily being led by, digital interactions in a way that was unimaginable. And just as a tiny measure of what the digital economy enabled, of the 166 governments that launched cash transfer programs during the pandemic, those that had digital access to their populations reached over 50% of their population with cash transfers to help people, tide them over during the pandemic. Whereas those that did not have digital access to the populations, reached only about 16% of the population. So I can give you all kinds of statistics, that kind of give us a sense of the importance and the penetration of the digital economy and the contributions that it, has made in pure economic terms. But then getting away from the economic side of it, it is a productivity tool. It is a time-wasting tool. It's a connectivity tool. It's just a simply, scrolling through stuff tool. It's what do I do with my hands when I have, nothing to do? So people are, constantly swiping on a screen tool. And of course, for a certain generation, it has become the world, and for better or for worse. Young people these days, they are, they're immersed in their phones rather than in the environment around them. So the impact of digital technologies has been profound. So let me just kind of pause there.
No, I think that's a great overview, right, of how technology is driving growth and, of course, impacting society and our individual behaviors and how we spend time, and, of course, productivity to a large extent. But, you've obviously referred to the term digital economy a few times in the last few minutes. I spent a fair bit of time talking about the digital economy in my book as well. But for many, I was very surprised to find, as I was doing the research for my book as well, for many, the term itself, digital economy, remains a very loosely defined term. for policymakers, as I was trying to have some of those conversations around the digital economy, it was unclear how to measure it. It was unclear how to define it. It was unclear what was in it, what was not in it, right? So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you are seeing countries around the world define digital economy and maybe start to measure it. Because as I see it, unless you start measuring it, it'll be hard to figure out the drivers of it, the key components of it. And unless you know that, for policymakers at least, it's going to be very hard to figure out, okay, how do you drive growth in the key elements that are going to drive your digital economy forward? So maybe we can just have a definition that we can think of the digital economy, and then we can start talking about the individual drivers of it.
Yeah, and I think you put your finger on a very important point, which is we talk about the digital economy, mostly in informal terms. We kind of all assume that we all kind of understand the digital economy, and most of the time we're sort of talking about the digital ecology rather than the digital economy, because the economy tends to suggest something more formal. Just like the traditional economy is organized in terms of different sectors, and you can add up the value created or income generated in those sectors, and that sort of you gross it up to something like GDP or something like that. Now the question is, what's the corresponding value for the digital economy? And we are actually in the process of measuring that at my research team at Digital Planet. And what I found quite interesting was that there isn't a standard way of defining the digital economy. So we've been taking a crack at trying to figure this out. How does one actually go about measuring the digital economy? And the reason why this is not a straightforward answer is because digital technologies are an output which generate value in and of themselves. For instance, if you think about social media, it generates a certain kind of value. It generates value to users. It generates values to advertisers. It generates value to everybody who's part of the value chain leading up to social media. Or you can do the same thing for AI and so on and so forth. But then digital technologies are also enablers in other sectors. So, for instance, you could have digital technologies that are in the back offices of pharmaceutical companies or machine tool producers or healthcare companies. And so, how do you aggregate all those contributions of the digital economy is a complex process. So, one way to sort of think about this is imagine the entire value chain that different digital applications are a part of. So at the very downstream end, the digital value chain is delivering a set of services and applications and tools that are useful to different kinds of consumers. And those services and tools and applications could be directly delivered by tech companies, or it could be indirectly delivered because those companies enable others. And then sort of working backwards from that, and those tools could range from social media applications to productivity, workplace productivity applications, to e-commerce applications, to sharing economy applications, and so on. So there's a whole range of such applications that we all kind of get value from. And then kind of working backwards, kind of saying, okay, these applications are sitting on top of some intermediate layers. And those intermediate layers are a combination of data infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, computing infrastructure, and so on. And then all of those are then sitting on top of some hard infrastructure. They could include the infrastructure that makes up the internet or the telecom networks, including fiber optic cables, on the bottom of the ocean floor. So then you sort of add up the value created in each of these layers, and that could become your measure of the digital economy. So that's one approach, and it's a bit of a brute force approach, but it is one approach. The reason why I call it a brute force approach is you can look at value created in each of these, and the value created are largely measured in terms of income generated by these sectors. Now, a lot of people might argue that, well, that doesn't capture everything in the digital economy. For instance, if I enter something on Google, and it gives me an answer, or it enters something on chat gpt, it gives me an answer that saves me time from having to walk over to a library and get that same information. That is not being captured in what I just measured. That's absolutely right. There's a lot of it that we just didn't capture in this brute force method. A different argument could be that I then spent the next hour essentially just scrolling through social media, and it generated no value at all, other than the fact that I watched a whole bunch of interesting cat videos, and maybe it made me happy, maybe it didn't, maybe it got me depressed, but that didn't get captured in what we just did. So this is the complexity of when we try to bottle the digital economy, and so we just keep that in mind.
That's right. It goes back to the point you made at the beginning of our conversation that there are many things being generated in the digital economy that are not being monetized necessarily in that moment, right? Like search queries, like time spent on social media. So it's going to be an imperfect measure, but a starting point nevertheless. But as I was doing my own research, I found that a few countries and some organizations globally have attempted this measure, which, as you mentioned, I think your Digital Planet initiative is also taking a crack at. OECD seems to have come up with a definition of it. I think countries like the US, China, I believe Canada, etc., have also, through their respective either statistics bureaus or economic analysis bureaus, come up with the definition and figure out, which of the codes, right? So, like, we'll have HAC codes, HSC codes, or in the case of India now, GST codes. Which of those codes do you want to include in the digital economy definition? And an interesting frame that I thought I'll add here is the digital infrastructure piece, which you mentioned, the digital manufacturing piece, the digital services piece, which will be, which will capture a lot of the social media, a lot of the, let's say, cab services, etc., and then the digital trade, right? So almost taking the existing kind of framework of the traditional GDP elements and looking at their digital equivalents was another one. And then the other conceptual frame that I found interesting was, when I was looking at how China measures it versus how the US measures the digital economy, a clear thing that came out was that there's a broad measure and then there's a narrow measure. The narrow measure being measuring the value add or the GDP product output of companies that are directly in the tech or digital spheres, but not necessarily measuring or including the ones that are just indirectly, or as you said, using them as enablers. So the example I like to give is, if you would look at India and India's digital economy, the output of a Flipkart, Amazon, Ola, etc., is the narrow definition of what we can say Bangalore and Gurgaon and the startups, and then the IT services companies of India are the narrow definition. But then you run into the industrial companies like, let's say, Mahindra, which have an EV arm, or which are using digital technologies to, let's say, power their tractors, right? And that becomes sort of the middle definition, a slightly broader definition. The broadest definition would be if you go down to the Kirana store today, a local convenience store, local grocery store, and if that person is using digital payments or local hyperlocal delivery technology for delivering some part of his output to his consumers, that all of that combined becomes sort of your broad measure of the digital economy. Yeah, but what I found interesting was, I think, as you're also saying, I think it's important to have that as a starting point, so that at least you can start to put some numbers around it, knowing that they might not be perfect measures. But now the other connected concept I want to get into, which is, I know, a big focus of the work you do at Digital Planet, is digital competitiveness. Right now, the moment you have established the fact that digital economy or the digital or the tech economy is a big driver of your growth and development story, the next subsequent question, in my mind at least, comes that, okay, what should nations be doing to make sure that they're competitive in this new digital economy sphere, right? And I think that's been a big focus of the work you've done over the last several years around digital competitiveness. So talk to us about why you think that is an important concept in the first place. But more importantly, how do you start defining and measuring digital competitiveness for nations?
Sure. Yeah. So great question, Anirudh. And so what we wanted to do was we tried to, kind of again go through this exercise of trying to bottle, the digital economy and digital competitiveness in some unit that could be taken across countries. So that we can do an apples to apples comparison across those countries. So what we did was we created something called a digital evolution index. And this is the idea of the index is to take something that is enormously complicated along the lines of what we were just talking about and reduce it to something simple to enable that apples to apples comparison, but not suggest that we take a reductive approach to this. So the whole idea is to kind of say, okay, how do I, just like we use GDP or GDP per capita as a measure, an imperfect but a measure to compare, different countries. Can we do something similar with the digital economy and think about the digital economy from the perspective of how competitive a particular country is relative to other countries around the world? And so when we think about that notion of competitiveness, we didn't want to simply take the GDP approach, which is just sort of add up the values across all the different codes of the sectors that we were just talking about, but really look at the idea of digital from a few different angles. So one angle is the demand side. So how are consumers, both people who are just regular end consumers or even businesses as consumers of digital technologies and applications, how quickly and widely are they embracing digital technologies and adopting it to their various activities? So that's kind of one, the demand side of it. And when we say demand side, that includes adoption not just of services and applications, but also different forms of hardware and so on and so forth. Then a second part of it is the supply side. What does the digital infrastructure look like in that country? And then, as you can imagine, that infrastructure has many different layers, in it. Going from a hard physical layer to all the different intermediate layers that sit on top of it. A third section of this index is what I would call the policy and regulatory elements, essentially the guardrails and the public framework within which the digital economy is managed. And that includes, everything to do with incentives and subsidies provided by the government to taxes and regulations, including regulations on data protection and privacy and governance, to regulations as they relate to freedom of speech and freedom of expression digitally. So all those elements, get put into this third box, which is policy and regulations. And the fourth part has to do with the dynamic elements in the system, and that includes, investments in startups, entrepreneurial capabilities, the VC and the private equity sectors. So all and the entrepreneurial talent, base. So all of that gets fed into this fourth sector. So demand, supply, policy, and entrepreneurial dynamic elements constitute an index. And then essentially we have about 200 plus indicators that feed into these different components. And, you wave the magic wand of index creation and we create an index across. Now we are looking at 125 countries. Our last iteration, we had 90 countries, we had 125 countries. It is the largest index of digital competitiveness anywhere in the world. And so we have looked at the state of digital evolution across 125 countries. And the second thing that we look at is the rate, or how quickly these countries are moving from a physical past to a digital future. So both the state and the rate are being captured by our digital evolution or the digital intelligence index measures.
That's great. I think so. On the methodology side, for those who are interested, I know that your website for the Digital Intelligence Index offers a fairly detailed description of what you just described overall. It gives you all the associated data and metrics also to evaluate. But what I want to get into is the magic output, right? Because I think once we start talking about certain countries and specific cases, I think that's when this index really starts to come alive in many ways. And the version that I have seen, which is now from a few years ago. Um, Before we get into that, the one thing I wanted to add to what you just said about the index is what I really loved about it when I first came across it, and then when I had a long chat with you about it as well a couple of years ago, was that it did not look at digital competitiveness from a very narrow standpoint. And I want to spend a minute on why that's important. In a country like India, especially, where the digital economy is a big part of the mainstream conversation now, especially over the last few years, there's a sense that there are two or three metrics that somehow define how well you're doing. Those in India, I'm from the tech VC world as well. Those often tend to be, in my mind, very myopic metrics. What I at least tend to find as very myopic metrics, which is, for example, the number of unicorns. So, if in a particular year we hit a large number of unicorns, that somehow seems to suggest that we're doing very well, which I think is a false metric. The other one is how many smartphone users you have, which, while I think is not a flawed metric, but it's an incomplete metric to really tell you how well your digital economy is doing. But what I liked about your index was it was a comprehensive one, where it looked at the digital economy and digital competitiveness from a fairly broad perspective, from an infrastructure, digital literacy, to services, to how well the population was actually adopting the technology. So you get a slightly more, I would say, holistic sense of a country's digital competitiveness and digital intelligence, as described in the index. But now I want to get into the index itself. So when you look at the index, you have categorized, at least in one of the charts, countries as standout, stall out, breakout, and I believe watch out, right? So, like I believe you're also ex McKinsey. Consultants love these two by two matrices. Obviously, you want to be on the top right quadrant whenever you see these quadrants, two by two quadrants. What's very interesting when I looked at it was there were certain countries in there that you would not have expected necessarily to be there, and certain countries that are not there you would have expected to be there. So I want you to talk to me about the kind of surprises that your index threw out. And of course, then let's also talk about where India stands. But talk to us about what surprises the index threw out at you.
Sure, of course. So this categorization that you're just talking about, Anirudh, if you can imagine, a graph where the vertical axis, measures the state of digital evolution. In other words, how mature or evolved your you already are. And then the horizontal axis measures the rate of digital evolution or the digital momentum, how quickly you're changing. And as to your point, we wanted to take a very comprehensive approach to evaluating countries and comparing them against benchmarks, because just measuring one thing or the other, whether it's number of smartphones or number of unicorns or amount of data generated, those are important measures, but they're partial measures. We wanted to take something holistic. We also didn't want to punish countries that were developing versus countries that were developed. So we wanted to take both the state and the rate as a measure. So when you think about this, the space that I just mentioned, the vertical being the state and the horizontal being the rate, you can imagine there's a top right-hand corner, which is high in state and high in rate. Those are the countries that we would call the standout countries. And so you would ask, so who are in those standout countries? And the country that, an example of, two countries that are in the standout, I can mention many, but two that are in sort of an interesting members of that standout. One is Singapore, and the other is New Zealand. And I think it's interesting. One could almost say, well, Singapore is not a surprise. Most of us tend to think of it as a highly technologically evolved, city-state. But most of us don't even think about New Zealand. Many people can't even find New Zealand on a real map. What's going on with New Zealand? It turns out that New Zealand has a fairly proactive approach to supporting the digital ecology of the country and using digital technologies as a way to advance this tiny country, but also as a very powerful way to connect a country that is geographically so far away from where the action is, whether the action is in the developed world or even in the developing world. New Zealand just seems very far away, but digital is a way to kind of compress that distance. So New Zealand and Singapore are part of the standout. So is the United States. And again, that's not a surprise. However, the United States is not as moving as quickly as Singapore does. So the United States is sort of an interesting economy because digital economy is large. It also has a fair amount of healthy digital momentum. Now, if I were to compare the United States, a mature, advanced economy, with some of the European countries, the EU countries, and these are countries that I would say are mostly in the top left-hand side quadrant of the space that I mentioned, and these are what we call the stall-out countries. These are highly mature economies, digital economies, but along with maturity, they've also developed some digital arthritis. So they have sort of slowed down, and so their momentum is not so much. And then there are countries that are in the bottom right-hand side part of this space. These are the ones that I would call the most exciting countries from a digital investor perspective or a digital entrepreneur perspective. These are the breakout countries. They are countries that are not yet mature, haven't yet reached the levels of digital evolution as the ones in advanced Europe or the United States or Singapore. They have not fully achieved their potential, a lot of headroom to grow, and they're moving very, very fast. So examples of such economies are countries like China, countries like even Azerbaijan, or countries like Kenya, and of course, India. Now, a lot of people might wonder whether China and India should actually belong someplace else. It turns out that just given the sheer size of the populations of both China and India, and then you compare it with the overall adoption of digital technologies, the infrastructure, the policies and regulations, and so on and so forth, China and India still have not reached that level of Northern Europe or North America. So they are still in the breakout zone. And then there are the countries that are the so-called watch-out countries, which are essentially countries that are not doing so well on the state and not doing so well on the rate either. And there are several countries that I would say would be in this zone that such as South Africa or Hungary, and again, South Africa is among the most advanced countries on the African continent, but it is slowing on the digital front, and its momentum is not as much. Another interesting country is Brazil, which is in the watch-out zone as well. Very slow in terms of momentum, and quite low in terms of its state.
No, so what's very interesting, I think, is that obviously these four quadrants give you a sense of, as you rightly said, how mature you are, and of course how fast you are continuing to grow. There are a bunch of questions that come out, right? The moment you start looking at a chart like this. The first one is, if you look at the European nations, Western European nations that you were saying that are mature but are now the momentum is starting to slow down. It's not that different from how, if you were to look at just GDP numbers as well, typically these large or more advanced economies will tend to have lower growth rates than, let's say, developing countries that seem to have faster growth rates, but just a lower base. But the same question that one would have on the GDP side is a question I have on the digital competitiveness side also, which is, what are some of the ways in which digital laggards, right, countries that are in the watch-out zone, right, the bottom left quadrant, or the breakout zone, which is the bottom right quadrant in your map, what are some of the levers that you have observed that countries have really been able to use to move up, both in their, in the base and in the growth rate? And is that possible in the first place? It seems to suggest, your map does seem to suggest that it's possible. And if it is possible, then what are the levers that you've seen countries be able to use to move up quickly?
Sure. So one of the primary levers, and now we are sort of talking about the countries that are on the south of the map.
Correct.
There's a
The
troubling term
bottom
called
two quadrants. Correct.
exactly. There's a troubling term called the global south, which is meant to mean developing countries. But here on the map, there is indeed a south, a digital south of this map, and so the bottom two quadrants. And so there are many elements that are critical to these countries moving up towards the northern side of the map. One of the most important elements is simply access to digital infrastructure and services. And much of that access is being enabled by the penetration of the mobile phone in across those two quadrants. Now, the quadrants that are in the breakout section are then turbocharging that access to the mobile phone by layering on a number of other elements that are making the use of those mobile phones a lot more varied and a lot more dynamic, and that's adding to the dynamism of the countries that are in the breakout zone. Examples of, say India using, first of all, a tremendous burst of access in terms of mobile telephony across India, and not just telephony, high broadband mobile access, which then enables a variety of different applications, and those applications range from engaging in multimedia exchange and communication to mobile payments. And then once you have those elements in play, that then enables other kinds of digital activities. It could be using digital for startups, using digital applications to enable informal services. So if you're a flower seller or if you're a farmer with access to high-speed mobile internet, even in a rural area, you could advance many different forms of digital applications. So the countries that are really doing that in a scalable, concerted way are the ones that are moving very quickly on the rate dimension. The countries that have really slowed down in terms of digital access, they're not necessarily utilizing the digital infrastructure to the same degree, and using the multiplier effect of that digital infrastructure are the ones that are stalled in the stall out zone.
No, that's great. So access seems to be almost the enabler, right? Upon which then, as you're rightly saying, applications will get built, the supply and demand will start to meet, the farmer will figure out, okay, here are the problems I want to try and solve. There'll be an entrepreneur on the other side who will build out the application to solve that problem, whether it's for payments or market information or delivery or just connectivity to market, etc. Which it seems like a country like India has been doing very well for the last several years. As you pointed out, I think with access to smartphones, with access to cheap data, with a large startup ecosystem now that's constantly innovating in applications that are getting built on top of that digital layer, and then of course the digital public infrastructure that the country has also seen being built out, the digital public infrastructure, the India stack, that has then enabled a whole new set of applications to get built on top of those rails. It seems like a lot of those things have gone well, right? So the question for you is, in the case of India, let's say, given that so many of these things have gone well, what are some of the missing pieces now that India has got to get right to get into that standout top quadrant? What are still some few pieces that are still missing? Or is it just the extent of what India has done needs to just go further because we do happen to be a massive country? Or is it that we are missing some pieces also?
Yeah, so there are. First of all, everything you just mentioned about the tremendous strides that India has made in terms of access to the digital infrastructure, access to high-speed internet, cheap data, and then the digital public infrastructure as being this intermediate layer, essentially that layer that sits in between hard infrastructure and digital applications. has been a very powerful boost to the Indian digital economy and digital competitiveness overall. Now, what else does it need to do? Well, there are many elements that are important, right? So, first is 1.4 billion people, and once you sort of bring that down to adults and so on and so forth, we still have a gap to close in terms of those who have access and those who don't. And when I say access, it's not just a question of, oh, okay, does this person have access to a phone? The next question is, what kind of a phone? Does this phone enable a variety of other things on top of simply connectivity to the internet or connectivity to a few sites or social media? And then a second aspect is how inclusive is that access. So India and much of South Asia still comes at the bottom of the rankings when one looks at the gender gap in terms of digital access. So women tend to be significantly behind in terms of access to a mobile phone relative to men. And that gap is widest in South Asia and India in particular, relative to other regions of the world. So that's an important gap that needs to be closed. There's also a gap between urban areas and rural areas. And of course, that is being narrowed, just like the gender gap, but we still have some distance to go. So in addition to all of these different elements, we then need to kind of figure out what are digital technologies being used for. So are they being used for communication, for social interactions, for running informal services, or are they being used for higher productivity, forms of economic activity? So again, there's a lot of room for growth in terms of going down that path as far as the Indian use of the smartphone is concerned. Let me use one simple example to kind of illustrate this point. If you think about one of the largest sectors, if not the largest sector in the Indian economy, is agriculture. So one big element in agriculture is pests are all over, and a significant portion of the crop of a farmer gets destroyed by pests. And many of the farmers are small to medium holder farms. And so they are already operating with somewhat lower levels of technology in terms of their cultivation practices. Now, there is a potential for taking relatively low-level primitive forms of digital technologies, what I call crappy technology, and applying it to farms to do more precision farming that could involve fertilizing at the right time, seeding at the right time, or using, putting different kinds of crops, on your farms, using certain apps in order to identify the pest that might come on your crop, and then figuring out just the right intervention to get the pest out. Now, even a simple intervention like identifying the pest and taking the right action at the right time to eliminate the pest. There are some apps. There's an app called Plantix, for instance, which allows you to do that. Take a picture of the pest on your crop, and Plantix, the app, will identify what the problem is and what intervention needs to be taken. And if you're a smallholder farmer, if you take that intervention, that small change in your behavior could have a massive increase in your yield,
and your productivity.
because your level of productivity was so low to start with. So that's what I mean in terms of translating that access into something that is income generating, jobs generating, economy enhancing. That's the huge headroom for growth in India. And I just use that one example. There are hundreds of examples across
No,
the
I think
system.
that's a great example, and I think great. I mean, both those points are great, and it goes back to the conversation we're having about the digital economy. It's a very important, I guess, takeaway, which is the digital economy. Whether you measure it, from a narrow definition or broad definition, it's important for everyone to understand the digital economy is not Bangalore or Gurgaon alone, right? Technology, at least what I argue in my book also, is it's really a factor of production now. Much like you need capital or labor on your farm, you need technology. And the more you integrate technology into your productive activity, whatever that is, whether you're a kirana store, a convenience store, or a farmer, or an IT services worker, or a factory line worker, or a trader for that matter, I think the more productivity and growth, hopefully, you get to see. And I think the example that you mentioned for that small farmer illustrates that point very, I think, clearly. I want to now move, given that you also mentioned that app, and that app, Plantix, I think in this case, is probably using some amount of artificial intelligence in that image recognition when it's identifying the pest. I want to use that as a segue to move into another very interesting piece of work that you and your team have been doing, which in many ways builds, I think, upon your digital intelligence index, but now goes into one of the favorite topics of everyone, I think, in 2023 and I think going into 2024, which is AI. Right? As artificial intelligence now emerges as a technology that many around the world are talking in terms of one of those transformative technologies that comes about once every few decades or centuries, right? People are comparing it to electricity, people are comparing it to the steam engine, etc. As AI, whether for better or for worse, as emerges as that technology, the conversation that we've been having about the digital economy will also start to apply. Some of the same questions will start to apply to which nations are going to be able to leverage AI to boost their competitiveness, their productivity, create new industries, right? Create further digital GDP, etc. And so I was really excited to see some of the work you've done around the emerging geography of AI and the emerging competitiveness of countries in the AI space. So let's move to that now, right? So um, tell us about the train scorecard that you and your team have come up with. And again, much like we were discussing for the Digital Intelligence Index, what were some of the surprises it threw out?
Sure. So the train scorecard that you're referring to, Anirudh, is the top-ranked artificial intelligence nation. So train it was kind of the snappy acronym that we created in order to, just like the Digital Intelligence Index, create an apples-to-apples comparison of 25 countries around the world as they continue to build their AI producing industry. And the reason why I find this a really important question to ask, which is, which are the countries that are in the lead in terms of AI production? Apart from this just being, we are all interested in league tables and competitiveness of countries and so on and so forth, and who's on top and who's below, and how can we move a few ranks up. Countries and policymakers and industrialists kind of get into that game, very readily. The reason why I find it particularly profound and an important question to ask in the context of AI is that AI, as you mentioned, is a general purpose technology like electricity. It's going to flow into a whole bunch of things, and then eventually it will deliver useful applications at the other end, one hopes, and it already is. There is an overwhelming dominance in terms of where the AI production is happening right now in basically two poles. One is in the United States, and the other is in China. And the rest of the world is kind of, if you think about these two at the very head of the curve, and then there's a curve kind of drops away quite significantly because one doesn't even think about much of AI anywhere else. So the moment one thinks about such a highly concentrated source of the AI industry, one should get worried, because you kind of wonder, okay, if it's just being produced, or 80 to 90% of it is being produced in China and the United States, what kind of limitations might that then translate into all the decisions that are going to be informed by these AI engines, by these foundational models that are being developed in just these two places. And those limitations could be because, both these poles are primarily being driven by a handful of players. In the United States, there are just a handful of highly innovative, foundation models developers. Companies like OpenAI, companies like Anthropic, companies like Inflection, and so on. And then these innovators themselves are being funded by a handful of players. Basically, 5 players are funding all these innovative companies, and there's a 6th player, which is Meta, which is not really going into the funding zone. It's essentially releasing open source models into the atmosphere, right? So it's a handful of companies in America, handful of companies in China, and these companies have sucked up a lot of the world's data, so they have access to a ton of this data. But then they are generating these, they're training algorithms on these data, and a lot of the choice as to what algorithms we train, what data sets are used, what are the applications that AI is going to be used for, is being driven by the leadership teams and the management teams of these handful of companies. So what that suggests is that this massive general purpose technology, its uses are going to be narrowed by a few parties. So it's really important to understand, is there a geography of AI that is beyond the United States and China, so that we get a breadth of perspectives, a diversity of data, a diversity of uses, and potentially even some course correction of the biases that could get built in if you have a very narrow set of producers. So we asked the question, where else is AI being developed? And of course, we found that, yeah, there are a few other places, maybe not with the same volume as China and the United States, but we are seeing, an emergence of, major centers of AI in other parts of the world, such as the UK, in the EU. There's, countries like France and Germany. And then in Asia, we see South Korea and Japan. And then we see India, as kind of a rising force in this growing AI geography. And then there are a couple of places that we didn't study as part of our train analysis, largely because of data limitations. Are Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia are also kind of becoming kind of leading players, and these are not, again, players that have the same volume of production in terms of foundation models and applications as the United States and China, but they're doing some pretty meaningful development, which could create alternatives to essentially the two big centers of AI development. So when we talk about surprises, some of the surprises are, of course, to some extent, it isn't a surprise that United States, China, and then a few other countries such as United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, France, Canada, Australia, South Korea, Sweden. These are the top countries in the AI rankings. India is out of the 25 countries, it comes in, I think, around 15. Some people are surprised by how low it is, but however, India is the one that has some of the greatest potential, simply because of the talent that is there in India, the amount of work that is being done in terms of AI development in India. And also, India is a country that is, quote unquote, data rich. So a very important input into the AI machine is data. And India is generating a massive amount of data, one of the largest producers of data in the world. It is the largest producer of mobile data in the world. It's also the largest volume of mobile payment information. So if all this data could be harnessed and could be done in a way that is maintaining user privacy and security and so on and so forth, India could be a major force on the AI front.
No, that's very helpful. I think that's a great overview of the work you've done with the train scorecard. Some of the surprises it has thrown up, some of the obvious winners it has thrown up. I think much like the conversation that we were having on the digital intelligence index side, that can laggards catch up, right? In many ways, the scorecard will also, by definition, help you figure out, okay, what would some of those levers be to help some of the countries that are, let's say, not in the top five. How do they take a crack at being in the top five? Again, with the understanding that much like that index, this index might be an imperfect measure at the end of the day as well, but at least a very good starting point. Couple of questions. One, many people have been talking about the fact, as you also rightly alluded to, that there's a great concentration of top tier research talent, capital, data, the infrastructure required, the compute required to run these large models in literally just two parts of the world, as you rightly mentioned, largely just the US and China, and even within these two countries, it's very, small parts of these countries that are really engaged in this work. You also seem to suggest that there is a way around this, right? So my question
Yeah.
to you is that hope? Because you mentioned talent. Are you just being hopeful and optimistic as we'd like to be? Or is there a way that the three or four pieces that we just talked about, the capital coming from the big tech firms, as you rightly mentioned, the four or five big tech firms that are funding most of this work, the top tier research talent, the ability to get all of this data, the compute infrastructure, all of these elements that we were just talking about, uh, that are the determinants of the AI winners. Do you see any signs that this is diffusing out? Because most of the talent seems to congregate in this from the rest of the world. So even if you have great talent, and you have great companies, let's say coming out of a France like Mistral and do it, the internet era seems to suggest that ultimately these will either end up being the pessimistic view, at least here, is that either these will end up being isolated cases, or after a certain level of scale, these companies and this talent will move to where the money is and where the ecosystem is the most advanced. So tell us, like, are there real signs that this could actually diffuse out?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great question, and I think this is also an interesting time to answer that question, which is we are looking at the growth of AI, pretty much at the early stages of an emerging wave of this general purpose technology. And the reason why I say that, and it's kind of sort of like talking about where is money going to be made in electricity. Is it at electricity generation, or is it actually the applications of electricity? So we are still at the electricity generation stage of AI. So if you think about where the excitement is these days, right? I mean, of course, for one thing, the exciting developments of AI that sort of broke out in 2023, that was mostly in the area of generative AI. But AI is something much larger than the generative AI space, right? And in fact, I have a much longer rant about the larger space in AI that I'm happy to go into if we have time. But if you just think about generative AI itself, the most exciting areas has been those foundation models, and primarily the foundation models that then feed the chat GPTs of the world. And the reason why it got so much exposure is, for one, ordinary people could experience the power of these foundation models, just on their phones or on their computers. And so when you make something as esoteric as AI suddenly so immediately accessible and experienceable, if that's a word, then people get excited about it. Then people start worrying, oh, is this actually going to now take my job? Because if I'm in a consulting firm and I'm part of a team of 3 analysts and 1 project leader, the same work could be done with 1 analyst and 1 project leader and GPT-4 sitting by me. So we realize it has some significant implications for that. But another reason why this really took off in 2023 is that the presence of generative AI threatened the business model of some of the biggest companies in the world, and perhaps some of the most golden of business models, which is Google's search engine, and that got threatened. And Microsoft, in particular, smelled blood in the water. Kind of, Microsoft has had a struggling search engine that basically couldn't get out of single digits forever, and suddenly it sees generative AI as a way to crack, that fortress that Google has built. So all of this sort of converges into an excitement around investing in foundation models. So you get the Anthropics of the world, you get the OpenAIs of the world suddenly being funded by 5 companies: Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Salesforce, and Amazon. And all of these companies, see value in getting that AI, plugging it back into their core products and franchises, and defending those franchises. But also, all of these foundation models rely on NVIDIA's chips. Very few other companies make the kind of chips that can handle the kind of massive compute that you're talking about. They rely on the cloud infrastructure of Amazon and Microsoft and Google. So they have to come back to these companies, to utilize the infrastructure, and of course they need the company's resources. So right now, all the excitement is around foundation models. But over the next few years, what we are likely to see is that these foundation models, we're going to have plenty of them, duking it out with each other. We are also going to see there's a whole bunch of open source models that have been let out into the world, by Meta and several other companies, which are then being used to develop AI systems by companies like Mistral and Aleph Alpha that you just mentioned. So we'll see some rivalry at this stage of the model part of the industry. And so over time, my expectation is that these models, which are very exciting today, the most highly prized part of the AI value chain, is going to become somewhat more commoditized. One. Second is a lot of these large language models are going to start looking at small language models, where you're going to have systems that are going to be much more specialized for particular uses, and so it will have to reach into only certain kinds of data sets and not the massive data sets that are owned by the Googles of the world. So we may have a little bit more diversity in terms of competition at that layer. We are also going to see more efficiency in terms of computing power. We're going to see competition. AMD, a major chip maker, has already launched competition to come up with alternatives to NVIDIA. We have Chinese chip makers who are struggling because the United States has put in a blockade on China. But Amazon and others, they're introducing chips. So we have a few alternatives to the NVIDIA monopoly. And then ultimately, I think, much like the other parts of the digital industry, the real value is going to be in the services and applications. All of these models eventually will have to make money somewhere. And then money is going to be, can I solve a problem for a user at the other end? The user could be somebody like you and me, or it could be a business. And which are the companies, and whether they're big companies or startups, that are actually serving solving a problem for a consumer using this AI stack. And I think that's where the differentiation is going to be. And there's going to be a lot of competition at that layer, because they're understanding those user needs, specializing the application to the user needs, is going to open the door to a lot more entrants. It's going to open the door to startups that are closer to the users, and they can develop more specialized applications. So over time, I think I see that's where the value is going to move. And so the stranglehold that the big companies have, that's never going to go away. There is massive economies of scale, and eventually we'll still be coming back to the same infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure, the compute infrastructure, and so on and so forth. There's also a talent attraction and capital attraction force that Silicon Valley in the United States and a few other centers have. But we're going to see a little bit more competition at that application stage. So over time, I think that's where the exciting aspect of AI is going to be, even though it doesn't look like that right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great vision you've laid out, and of course, I think the electricity example also seems to suggest that if you can actually get the applications right, and here you'll be solving some existing problems, but also coming up with new solutions for problems that were earlier thought to not have either be solvable or exist in the first
Yeah.
place. So I think that's where the excitement will happen. But of course, if you look at the consumer internet wave over the last 2-3 decades, one also sees that even in that application layer, so let's take mobility or cab apps as an example. Even though that's an exciting application that gets built basis, let's say, the iPhone and the iOS layer that a large big tech firm builds out, it's not necessary that the applications themselves will make money either, because there'll be so much competition even at that application layer, right? So if I was to ask you that, so while I would agree with your optimism that yes, the excitement should move at some point to the application layer, to the use case layer, and the small language model and not the LLM, let me play devil's advocate. Isn't there a high likelihood that that application layer becomes really crowded as well? And that ultimately, whoever is owning that infrastructure layer will actually be the one that will generate the most wealth still.
Yeah, I mean, there are different scenarios that could play out, and as always, with everything to do with making predictions about the future of technology, is the one prediction that we are going to be right about is that we're going to be wrong about every prediction we make,
That's right.
right? And
That's
so with that said, I do believe in the electricity, which is ultimately the electricity providers are important. They're indispensable. They're not necessarily making massive amounts of money. They are, to some extent, they are public utilities, and so they're making, enough of a profit, to justify being in the business. And in some cases, they are regulated utilities, depending on where you are. And so that's the role they play. They're a public utility. So my expectation is that AI, for what it's worth, and AI, of course, we know is not one thing, and it is a general purpose technology which leads into many different branches of deep learning, machine learning, AI, and so on and so forth. And they will become a lot more of like a public utility. And yes, they will be continuing to have some pretty significant margins, at that infrastructure layer, primarily because the economies of scale, primarily because the models are there, primarily because the data sets are there. There's a lot of technology involved in, sort of translating those data sets into decision rules and sharpening the algorithms and so on. Of course, there's going to be money made there, but I think the really exciting parts are going to be in how is all this going to be used, and even if you think about 2023 as being the year when everybody was jumping up and down about AI, you ask the question, well, who made money from it? And it's not clear that anybody actually has made money as yet. People have spent a lot of money into this stuff, but who's making money from AI is not clear, and it's not clear even in 2024. So ultimately, the chickens are going to come home to roost. Somebody has to pay for all this investment, and those payments have to happen somewhere. So I do believe that AI will actually be real when it starts solving problems for us. And those problems could be, I need to write, Anirudh's next book. So let's get ChatGPT to produce the first draft, which is going to be not a great draft. But then once you have Anirudh's intelligence layered on top of artificial intelligence, I have another brilliant book that's going to come out. Perhaps that's going to be a future. And this is where I'm just going to come back to my beef with AI, which I had mentioned before. So before we get all excited about AI and how it's going to be this world changing thing and once in a lifetime thing, I think AI had a chance to prove itself, its biggest chance to prove itself, and that was before 2023. And it completely, totally, and absolutely failed. And that chance was in 2020. The chance was in early to mid 2020, where we had hundreds and thousands of people going into hospital rooms with all kinds of symptoms, and the healthcare system was overwhelmed. They had far too much information in front of them and not enough ways to make a decision, to kind of say, here's this person who's come in with a cough. I can't tell whether it's a COVID cough or just a regular cough. And if I can't tell what kind of a cough it is, I don't know what kind of an action to take with this person. Do I send this person to the ICU? Do I tell this person, go home and gargle, or do I put this person in the corridor and wait to see if the symptoms get worse? This is when we needed AI. This is when we needed all this data to then help inform life-changing decisions. I'm not talking about writing an essay. I'm not talking about coming up with the Beatles' next song. I'm not talking about all the fun stuff of AI. This is changing ways in which more people could have lived. And there were lots of algorithms and decision systems that were developed, hundreds of them actually, to try and train AI systems on different coughing sounds and or different symptoms that people were showing. All of them failed. None of them was clinically useful. So what I would say is, let's go back and solve those problems, and then come back and tell us that we are in the age of AI. And until we can figure out, when the next pandemic hits us, that we are in a position to be able to make better decisions with all this data coming at us, we will not have achieved the age of AI. So that's my beef. I'm going to come back to AI failed, and we need to solve that problem first.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it links back to maybe some of the work you are doing, which is this conversation around where the majority, 80, 90, 95% of AI is being developed, because it's in a very small cross section of society. As a result, ultimately, unless that gets more broad based, whether multiple countries or multiple kinds of people, multiple kinds of engineers, right? Not just software engineers trained in a certain way or living in a certain part of the world, unless it becomes more broad based, I think your issue, the issue that you just highlighted, which is, are we leveraging AI? Are we spending the R&D dollars on solving for the right problems? And right problems for a large cross section of people around the world at the right time? I think that question will remain untackled, and that will be a shame, right? We don't want to live a age of just entertainment AI, right? I think what you're saying is it should be used and leveraged to solve for real problems. And that's a completely fair point. And I think to the extent that it becomes more multilateral, more, multi-stakeholder based, I think we are more likely to see the scenario that, the vision you have laid out. I want to end, I know we are running out of time, but I want to end with a couple of questions around India, right? So India, I think, as you've already sort of alluded to, India is currently thinking about its AI strategy, both Indian corporates, Indian tech firms, as well as, I would say, policymakers. And the one question that everyone's been talking about, which is not necessarily the only question, but the one question is, should we get into the GPT race? Should we get into the LLM race? And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but from what you've said, it seems to me that what you would suggest for India is to not get into the race, but focus on the use cases and the applications that can help solve problems for a large swath of India's population, whether it's healthcare, education, agriculture, various problems that exist in these sectors that AI can be leveraged for, as opposed to getting into this high capital, high, research, high infrastructure game that is get the biggest LLM out there. Is that correct, or would you have a different vision for where India should focus?
Yeah, so I think when we say India, India is, of course, the name of a country. The country does not make decisions. The decisions are made by human beings. And then the question is, where are the human beings sitting and what are their motivations, right? So if I'm a human being who's sitting in government and in the policy domain, I will have one set of answers to your question. It is a very different one if I'm sitting in a VC firm or if I'm sitting in a tech company, maybe Infosys, or a startup, that is maybe even a glimmer in somebody's eyes. So the answer to these questions really vary. So I do believe that there are just limitless possibilities of applying. When we say AI, I mean, it's not even something fancy. It could be something quite primitive, which basically sort of uses all the data that's being generated from the massive explosion of digital access in India, and then being able to translate all that data into meaningful decisions, which then improve people's lives. Either raises their income potential, makes them productive, gives them new jobs or new ways to improve what they do. And if you just take a small intervention which has this massive swing in terms of productivity and yield, you could make an enormous difference to people's lives. You can make an enormous difference to the state of healthcare by just taking a certain amount of data and then translating into certain kinds of actions. You can make an enormous difference to education. India's the youngest country in the world, the largest country in the world, and the youngest. And much of this youth, this demographic dividend is going waste because the youth are insufficiently prepared. We don't have enough educational systems to get them skills ready. So can we use this AI system to turbocharge that kind of education in multiple languages, given that people are also coming from so many different parts of the country? So those are some of the big uses and opportunities. The question is, who can make money from creating those kind of applications? If there are enough parties that can make money, that we'll see enough startups doing these kinds of things. But if this isn't really a high money making endeavor, then it has to be led by the public sector. It has to be led, either by the public sector investing or the public sector co-investing with the private sector and potentially with the development sector. Now, having said that, do we have a good track record of the public sector being a good steward of that kind of energy? Well, we've seen some pretty significant developments in terms of digital public infrastructure in India. And I think the value of digital public infrastructure is essentially creating this public utility, essentially the rails on top of which a whole bunch of interesting applications can sit. And those rails could be identity systems, data exchange systems, payment systems. Can I add AI to that? If we can, and if there is a concerted way of doing it, I do believe that India can actually make some significant advances. And it would pay off because, we do have good talent in India, but we need a lot more. So how do you train that talent? You could potentially use these AI systems to get people more technically trained, and then that sort of has a positive loop. So I do believe there is a possibility there if we expand our notion of digital public infrastructure to embrace critical aspects of AI that then translate into productivity enhancement. But we are not there yet. But I'm hopeful that we have enough visionaries in the system who are thinking about these things. Of course, as Nandan Nilekani has said, that India is going to be data rich before it actually becomes rich, and India is already data rich. So let's use that as the foundation for really turbocharging AI as part of the DPI system that India has actually been the world leader of.
Yeah. No, great. This has been very helpful. I think this vision of how India and various different groups within India, whether it's entrepreneurs, policymakers, business leaders, and others, can think of leveraging AI to create productivity gains as well as wealth, I think is nicely laid out. You've laid out obviously the few pieces that still need to be gotten right over time. I know we've run out of time, but I end every podcast with two questions. And these are very quick ones, and I think simple ones. But one is a book that you would recommend for people who are listening to this podcast. Obviously, not mine or yours, but any other book that you would recommend for people who are interested in the kinds of issues we've been talking about today. And second would be a guest for the podcast who you think we'd enjoy having.
Yeah, so if in terms of a book, a recent book that I found, quite fascinating is called Power and Progress. It's by Darren
Darren,
Acemoglu.
we've had
And
him, so you'll have to come up with the second one. We've had him
okay,
already.
okay, you've had him.
But
Well, you've had him for the podcast. So I was just thinking about the book. Another book which is quite interesting is called The Coming Wave. And that's by Mustafa Suleiman and Michael Bhaskar, no relation. So Mustafa is the co-founder of DeepMind, one of the great AI companies, which was acquired by Google, and then Mustafa has gone off and founded another company, and he's written a powerful book about technology and the power of technology. I find the book being a little too buzzy and a little too repetitive, over the 300 or so pages. But it's an interesting read. It's well written. So I would recommend that as as kind of a useful both a historical perspective and a contemporary perspective on where we're going, particularly with artificial intelligence and synthetic biology as the two major technological transformations that he's looking at. And you might want to think about having him on your show. He's a great speaker, and I think it would be a very interesting person to listen to.
Great. No, both I think great recommendations. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us. I think about very specific ways in which I think we can grab the concepts of digital economy, digital competitiveness, and now AI competitiveness. Thanks for taking the time, and hopefully we'll see you back in India soon as well.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Anirudh, and good luck with the podcast. And I look forward to following your podcast over the years.
Thank you.